It's Friday night. It's the preview show. It's the No Nay Never podcast.
Hello and welcome to the preview show brought to you by the No Nay Never podcast. I am your secondary host, shall we say, the support act for this evening's proceedings, and we are joined as ever, of course, by the main man himself, Statman Dave Roberts. Dave, welcome back to the preview show.
Hi Natalie, good to be back in episode 251.
I'm not really sure what we're going to do about numbering, actually. I always wondered whether we were going to keep the preview show separate. I like to think of this as episode number 10 of the preview show, but then I quite like the idea that the No Nay Never podcast has got up to 250 episodes. If you, of course, missed that, we hit that almighty milestone this week in that our little podcast, our little baby, is 250 episodes old. Goodness gracious me. And I think at the last count, we'd just gone over 335,000 listens in our history. So it makes us all feel very old. But, it's good stuff. It's exciting stuff. So, yes, indeed, Dave. I always feel as well with our slightly jazz hands quiz show style intro that I feel like we descend a little bit into the Muppet Show when we go into this. And
It does
I'm
sound
not
a bit like
suggesting. It does, doesn't it? And I'm like, welcome to the preview show. It's the Muppet Show. Yes, that's my rather unsuccessful Kermit the Frog impression. I feel like that might make another appearance before the end of the season. What are we doing this week? We are, of course, previewing our weekend game in the Premier League, Saturday afternoon, 3:00 away at Sheffield United. And we are here with young Statman Dave to talk about all things Sheffield. So, Dave, why don't you kick us off and tell us all about the opposition? Who are they?
We've missed the quiz question now. We're not doing that first.
Oh, God, we are, of course. Do you know, I'm about as organised as a chocolate fire guard these days. Do you know what it was, listeners? I'll give you a little bit of a sneaky peek as to behind the scenes of the recording of the No Nay Never podcast. Dave sends me the running order for the show, and it's on a lovely, brilliant, interactive Excel spreadsheet, and it's got all of the stats and everything and where I need to be. And I just scrolled down to just check the running order hadn't changed, and I hadn't scrolled up to the back of the top of the page, so I was just coming in halfway there. So let's reversey-persy and let's go. So, Dave, before we get into this week's preview about Sheffield United away, we have a small matter of a quiz question that we need to answer. So last week we set the following quiz question for our listeners. Which Burnley player scored the goal to earn the Clarets' only Premier League home point against Chelsea, and what was the year? Dave, tell us the answer.
Well, before I tell people the answer, I was hoping with this one that I might have made the question redundant. We would have got at least a point or maybe a win against Chelsea, but obviously on Saturday that wasn't to be, and the answer still is reflective of Burnley's entire home Premier League history against Chelsea. And in that case, the player to earn the point for us was Robbie Brady. He scored a sublime free kick, an equalising goal after Chelsea had scored early on, and that was in February 2017.
Excellent. Now, we were a bit shy, actually, of correct answers this week on this one. Either people would just thought it was too easy or they thought it was maybe too hard. But our main correct answer, when you take aside, of course, Tom from Team No Nay Never, was Rob Thomas, who contacted us on Twitter to say correctly it was Robbie Brady 2017. And I think
John Robertson got it right as well.
Oh, he did. Yes, he did. Of course he did. John always gets it right. Clever clocks. And I don't believe we had any on the inbox. Nope, we didn't have any by email either. So just 2 of our listeners got that right this week. So tune in and keep listening until the end of the show, where we will have this week's quiz question, which hopefully will get people getting a bit more enthusiastic about sending us answers.
Opposition stats.
So let's move on. We may or may not have already said this, but of course we're now going to preview Sheffield United away. It's probably a good job that our regular listeners are used to the chaos that is the No Nay Never podcast. Otherwise, that 335,000 listens would probably be less than 35. listeners. Dave, kick us off. Sheffield United away. Who are they?
Yeah, well, Sheffield United Football Club was founded in 1889, and they were actually the first club to use the word United in their team name. Their formation came 22 years after their city rival Sheffield Wednesday, who were originally just known as the Wednesday. However, the oldest team in Sheffield are Sheffield FC. They're recognised as the oldest football club in the world, and their history goes back another 10 years to 1857. Back to Sheffield United, though, and they joined the Football League Division 2 in 1892.
Excellent stuff. I did not know that about Sheffield FC. What about their nicknames then, please, Dave?
Although Sheffield United are now known as the Blades, their original nickname from when they started out in 1889 to 1912 was the Cutlers. And both of these nicknames are references to the city of Sheffield being a producer of steel and, in particular, cutlery.
Indeed, I did know that because I think all of us in our time have watched that 90s classic that was the Full Monty, and I remember, was it Sean Bean? No.
Yes.
No, it wasn't Sean Bean who did Full Monty, it was Robert Carlyle.
Oh.
The other one. And they were stealing steel because the steel industry had gone under. That's why they ended up stripping in the first place. You see, you listeners don't just tune in for the football knowledge, you get a whole wave of general knowledge in here. Moving swiftly on from the Full Monty. Ground and capacity, please, Dave.
Sheffield United play their home games at Bramall Lane. It's got a current capacity of just over 32,000. It used to host cricket matches as well as football until as recently as the 1970s, and is just one of two venues to host a full England international, that's for football, an FA Cup final, and also a cricket test match. The other venue, by the way, was the Oval. Burnley's away allocation of 2,800 tickets for Saturday's game is already sold out.
Excellent. Well, moving on to the actual team themselves, who is their all-time goal scorer, please?
Harry Johnson played for Sheffield United from 1916 to 1931, and he netted an impressive 252 goals in 351 matches in all competitions for the Blades. And he also happens to be United's top scorer in matches against Burnley with 15. No other player has scored more goals against Burnley for a single club, although Jimmy Greaves did score a combined 21 goals against the Clarets. That was for Chelsea and for Tottenham.
And what about the heaviest Burnley defeat then?
Oh, well, we mentioned in one of our previous preview shows, we've already played down Aston Villa, and we mentioned about a 10-0 away defeat at Villa in 1925. And you may recall, anyone listening to that one, that was the first game after the revised offside rule had been introduced. So previously you used to have three players, the goalkeeper plus two defenders, in front of the last attacker, and then they changed it and made it goalkeeper plus one. Burnley players hadn't quite got used to that and lost 10-0 to Aston Villa. But we've had two 10-0 away defeats in the league, and the other one was against Sheffield United at Bramall Lane. That was back in 1929. And the result was actually quite remarkable because Burnley had actually beaten Sheffield United the previous week 2-1 in an FA Cup match, although that was at Turf Moor.
Oh, we don't like those kind of stats. Let's move on to more positive things then, Dave. What about Burnley's biggest win?
Well, Burnley have only actually had 6 away wins at Sheffield United. 4 of those were by a single goal, plus a 3-1 win just over 100 years ago in October 1919. But the other one by 2 goals was a 2-0 win in August 1973, which is also Burnley's last top-flight win at Bramall Lane. Doug Collins and Martin Dobson were on the score sheet for Burnley that day.
So what about Burnley's last win then?
Our only win in our last 18 visits to play Sheffield United at Bramall Lane. So that's since the one we just mentioned in August 1973, was a 3-2 victory in December 2008. That was, of course, the magnificent 2008-2009 promotion season. Burnley beat Sheffield United home and away, as well as a 1-0 win in the playoff final at Wembley to gain promotion to the Premier League for the first time. Burnley's goal scorers in that 3-2 away win in 2008 were Martin Patterson, Graham Alexander with a penalty, and also Chris Eagles.
And then obviously at this point, Dave, we normally come to talk about last season's meeting between the two. But again, given that this is Sheffield United's promotion year, we haven't got last season to talk about because they were, of course, in the Championship. So let's move on to talk about their manager.
Yeah, 52-year-old Chris Wilder has been manager of Sheffield United since May 2016. He was born in Stocksbridge near Sheffield in 1967, and he led the Blades to a second-place finish in the Championship behind Norwich City last season, and with it, automatic promotion to the Premier League.
And what about some head-to-head stats then, please, Dave? What does it look like when we analyse the games between the two?
Well, before I go on to the actual figures, we did mention in last week's, I did promise to get something up in terms of a comparison.
Ooh, homework.
So if you look on your spreadsheet, and perhaps we can post this when we publish the podcast, there's a comparison of how Burnley have done against the teams in the Premier League this season. The all-time away matches, that's in all competitions, not just Premier League matches, because we haven't played Sheffield United in the Premier League, against all those sides. When we look at that overall away record for Sheffield United, it's not good. We've played 60 times against Sheffield United at Bramall Lane. We've won just 6 of those, we've drawn 18, and we've lost 36. So that does give a win percentage of 10%, that's 1 in 10. And when you look at the average across all the sides of the other 19 teams in the Premier League, our away win percentage is just a smidge below 20%. So it's around about half of the victories we get against Sheffield United against average, and it's bottom of the list. It's basically the worst one. We haven't played at Chelsea yet, but Chelsea's actually the best on there. We've actually got a win percentage of just under 33% against Chelsea. 20% is the average, and Sheffield United is 10%. When we look at the top flight away matches only, Burnley's away record is only marginally better, so that's played 34. We've won 4 of those, so that's a little bit better than 10%. We've drawn 10 and we've lost 20.
And I can indeed confirm that I do have a swanky, jazzy, fancy new table on my spreadsheet, which I hadn't fully spotted, even despite my error at the beginning of the show when I was already halfway down the page and it was staring at me. Not so observational this evening, am I? What about players then who've played for both sides, Dave?
Okay, there's over 30 Burnley players who've also represented Sheffield United since the Second World War. They include Tom Cowan, John Francis, Andy Gray, John Harley, Adrian Heath, Jamie Hoyland, Glenn Little, who I'd forgotten about, the current Burnley FC under-18s head coach, Tony Philliskirk, as well as Gareth Taylor and David Unsworth. And there are lots more names I could have mentioned in this section, but that might have given away the quiz question, which we'll be posing at the end of the show, which does relate to a player who played for Burnley and for Sheffield United.
Ooh, that's exciting. I used to absolutely love Gareth Taylor. He was one of my favourite players. Okay, well, finally then, Dave, turning to the game at the weekend, who's the man in the middle? Who's our referee?
Well, although we've heard that Bramall Lane seems to be a very unlucky ground for Burnley in the past, Saturday's referee Simon Hooper seems to be a rather luckier omen for us. In 9 past matches, we've won 6, drawn 2 and lost just 1. The last time we saw him for a Burnley match was the home FA Cup win over Barnsley back in January of this year, which also happened to be the first match when VAR was used, or certainly Burnley's first match when VAR was used. And you may recall in that match we had a penalty overturned in the first half. We had a situation where Matty Vidra had got the ball, put the ball in the penalty spot, was ready to take it, and VAR ruled it out. And we did get a penalty later in the game, but if I remember rightly, Chris Wood scored that one. Simon Hooper will be assisted by Graham Scott in the Stockley Park VAR studio.
Statman Dave's Stat of the Week.
Well, we're not going to leave it there, Dave, because we know by now that the bank of Statman Dave is just bottomless in terms of quality. So why don't you treat our listeners? Why don't you give us your miscellaneous Stat of the Week?
Okay, this week's Stat of the Week. Most Burnley fans will recall the shock of the FA Cup defeat to non-league Lincoln City in 2017, and perhaps also the defeat to non-league Wimbledon in the same competition in 1975. But long before either of these matches, there was another FA Cup upset going way back to January 1890. At the time, Sheffield United weren't even playing in an organised league. Remember at the start of the show we mentioned that they'd only started up in 1889. So in the season 1889-90, they basically weren't playing an organised league, just playing friendlies. And the visit of First Division Burnley in the FA Cup first round was their first ever competitive fixture. They actually got through a couple of earlier qualifying rounds in the FA Cup. But needless to say, Burnley were humbled 2-1 at the hands of their less experienced opponents. So it didn't start off well with our first ever visit to Bramall Lane. But that was as far as Sheffield United's cup run went that season, as they lost 13-0 to Bolton Wanderers in the next round.
Opposition View.
Well, I think it's about time that we introduced ourselves to our opposition this week, and I'm delighted to be joined on the preview show by Ben Meakin of the BladesPod. Ben, welcome to No Nay Never.
Thanks very much for having me. It's a pleasure.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you come to be a Sheffield fan?
I guess 6 years ago I probably would have said I'd have blamed my dad, but actually I think he probably deserves some credit now because it's been it's been a good few years. But yeah, it's the classic sort of my dad was a big Blades fan, started taking me when I was a youngster, and it's kind of spiraled from there. And yeah, I guess there's been a lot of probably more downs than ups in that kind of 25 years or so, but it's currently a very special time to be a Blade.
Yeah, you guys must just be so delighted with promotion. You know, you've got yourselves there, and it's incredible, isn't it? When you pull on your boots at the beginning of that season, and you see the players coming out of the tunnel on that first home game in the Premier League. It's just something else, isn't it?
Yeah, it has been special. I mean, we try not to keep drawing parallels to where we were 3 years ago, which was League One, but there is this constant thing of like, we've got Liverpool on Monday and on Saturday, and we were preparing for Bristol Rovers at home this time 3 years ago, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's still, I think it probably has sunk in now. I mean, we're like a couple of months into the season, so you sort of expect that it would have done, but it definitely is still a little bit surreal. Particularly, when you just sort of look down the fixture list and just see, all the sort of names coming up that really it was a bit of a dream to think we would be playing them a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one is the Premier League, because we definitely went through that same phase when we first got promoted. But it's actually amazing how quickly you become used to those level of games and the big spectacular games that you really look forward to as a fan. You'll go through a phase where they then become, in fact, there's 3 stages of it I think you'll go through. There's the wide-eyed, oh my God, this is amazing, I can't believe we're playing United away phase. And then you go through this, oh God, I can't believe we're going to play the top 6, because it's just painful and you just get beat and it's horrible. But then you come out the back end of that and you start to improve and you start to actually really enjoy the challenge of those games. So yeah, I look forward to you guys getting there. Obviously Burnley and Sheffield United this weekend, they've not played together for 10 years, just because there was a fateful afternoon 10 years ago where our respective clubs took very different paths, a bit of a sliding doors moment. Obviously, we've talked about this off air on a different show as well, so I don't want to bring up bad wounds, but I think you're all right with this. I'm going to ask you the question. But how did you feel on that day? What was your overwhelming feeling of Wembley?
So I have a very negative relationship with Wembley, because I've been maybe 4 or 5 times and seen United lose every single time, and in fact, we've never scored a goal in a playoff final. We've played 4 playoff finals and we haven't scored in any of them. So I think this one, the Burnley one, this was the 3rd of the 4. This was kind of the tipping point of like, oh no, these are just going to be miserable all the time, and they will just never be enjoyable. I think I was quite confident going into it, because we'd finished 3rd, and we had a really good team, a very good young team. I mean, sliding doors is very apt. I mean, Cal Walker had just broken into that team. He was like 17, 18 years old. Cal Norton, who also went to Tottenham, hasn't had quite the same career, but he'd come into the team that season as well. A lot of other good young players. We didn't get promoted. We had to sell them the next year. And yeah, that really was we got relegated 2 seasons later and then spent 6 years in League One. So yeah, it was a sliding doors moment. I don't remember anything good about that game at all. I think it was a miserable game. We were sat in the sunshine, so you're kind of baking in the May heat at Wembley. I swear it's like 10 degrees hotter inside Wembley than it is everywhere else in the country. And we basically did nothing. The only memories is obviously Wade Elliott scoring. Our substitute Jamie Ward getting sent off for, I think it was for 2 handballs, a penalty not being given, and then Lee Hendry getting sent off after full time by Mike Dean. So not good memories, but it's as I say, the last couple of years have been so good that I feel like I can talk about it now, which is progress.
Good for you. It's funny, really. I'm quite stubborn by nature, so I tend to sulk for quite some time if things don't go our way. So I'm not entirely sure I would have been over it yet.
Do you know, I do have one more memory actually, which has just popped in here, and maybe I shouldn't say this because it's just.
No, please do.
But, so I was living in London at the time, so it was a relatively short trek back to my house. I was with my dad and my brother, obviously wearing United shirts, and a West Ham fan in his car drove past us and beeped his horn and laughed at us out the window as we were walking back to my house. And I didn't, obviously 2 seasons removed from Carlos Tevez situation getting us relegated, and I was so like, I think so, just an empty shell at that point. I didn't even react to it.
I think that is brutal. That is,
isn't
God.
it?
I hope you wipe the floor with West Ham when you play them.
Yeah, we just drew with them at the weekend, so I feel that was a moral victory.
That is, I'm trying my best not to laugh. That is hilarious, but also shocking in equal measure. I'm not sure even I'd have the balls to do that, to be honest, but never mind. But literally, the sliding doors thing is quite funny, really, because we were in some, and not many people know this, but we were in some real financial troubles when, by Wembley, and it's pretty common knowledge now that if we hadn't have won,
You're right.
Sorry. I'm sorry, listeners. We just had a little bit of a blip there. If we hadn't have won Wembley at the time that we did, we were heading for administration, and we would probably, our lives would have taken a completely different turn. So it's quite interesting. But now you are here, so it's taken you 10 years, but finally you're here. Well done. How are you guys adapting to life in the Premier League? I mean, from the outsiders looking in, it looks pretty incredible.
It's been interesting. There's a bit of a debate among United fans about, so we've changed our formation slightly this season. We had a lot of success last season playing with 2 strikers and a number 10 behind them. This season we still play with 2 strikers, but we've gone for a flatter 3 in midfield, and we've definitely lost some of our, I guess, chance creation, attacking ability through doing that, but we've also become more solid. I mean, we did get promoted with the best defence in the Championship last season, so that was one reason I thought we'd do quite well this year, is because I thought that would, not to the same extent, but at least allow us to stay in games quite well. So that's been, I don't want to say it's been frustrating, because we've got 13 points and after 10 games.
It's amazing.
That is a hell of a return. And also, if you look at the teams that we've played, I mean, initially our fixture list, you're like, there's a good chance to get some points on the board here. You've got Palace, you've got Leicester, there's a good chance. And then you look at the league table, it's like, oh wait, Palace are like 7th, Leicester are the 3rd best team in the league at the minute. Like, actually, that was quite a tough start to the season. So I think out of the whole of the top 10, I think there's only the 2 Manchester teams that we haven't played in our first 10 games, and 13 points is pretty good. So there's this kind of thing of like, can we open it up a bit more and try and create more chances? Because we are one of the lowest scorers in the league, I think, and also lowest kind of chance creation teams as well. So there's a bit of like, I'd like to see us go for games a bit more, but you really can't argue with the results at the moment. And, if we can keep grinding out 13 points for every 10 games, then we're going to be in a great position.
Yeah, you absolutely are. And I mean, if you think about it from the narrative of the press, which you'll start to get used to, the national media's narrative about life in the Premier League, you'll go through phases of hating them and just trying to ignore them as much as you can. But if you think about our narrative this season, people are saying what a fantastic start we've had, how promising we look. No, but we're not even being considered for relegation, and you've got 1 point more than we have. So, you've got to look at that as a good start. Turning to the game at the weekend then, what player would you single out for us to keep an eye on, one who's going to cause us a few problems?
I think this is always a difficult question to answer, because we play in such a sort of particular way where we don't, I guess a little bit like Burnley, we don't really have any superstar players, or rather...
Same.
I mean, we don't have a Dwight McNeil, I would say, of like, this is the one guy that's going to, cause real problems. We're very, quite structured in our approach. We try and pen teams in, create overloads. I'd say probably the most dangerous player, the guy that sort of knits it all together, is David McGoldrick, who is ostensibly a striker, but he's actually terrible at finishing. He should have about 5 goals this season already. He's missed some absolute sitters, but we know that it is part of his what he does. I guess what he brings to the team is this ability to get on the ball, to drop into midfield. This is kind of makes up for not having this number 10 anymore, and basically help us get up the pitch, create attacks out of change defence into attack. So he's the one that sort of constantly looks like the really good footballer that you want to give him the ball as much as possible. Probably the other one I'd shout out is Ender Stevens, who's our left wing back, who I don't think it's a stretch to say he's kind of showing himself to be like a top 5 left wing back in this league. He's incredible defensively, and he just seems to nutmeg a player every single week at the minute. He's like one of the most completed something like the 4th most dribbles in the league so far this season. He's just beating players left and right. Really, just a great, I guess, a player that combines great defence with great attack. So yeah, those are 2 standout players, I suppose. But yeah, we're a kind of strength in numbers kind of team. That the whole is greater than the sum of its parts kind of thing.
So what about from a Burnley perspective? Is there anybody you're particularly concerned about playing?
Definitely wary of the 2 strikers, Wood and Barnes, if they play. I mean, from what I've kind of seen of Burnley, there just seems to be this kind of very efficient at creating chances for those 2 strikers. That sort of makes sense from a football point of view. That's what the strikers are there for. But Burnley seem to be particularly good at it. So yeah, those 2 definitely are ones that always seem to. I don't know. They're quite unfashionable sort of names in the Premier League, aren't they? But I mean, Barnes is on he was on like a ridiculous tear for a while there. I think from the end of last season, a couple of months at the end of last season through to the start of this one, just banging them in left and right. So yeah, him and Wood are definitely. It sounds pretty obvious, picking out the strikers, but yeah, those are the 2 that would worry me.
Yeah, cool. I guess then moving away and let's fast forward to the end of the season. What are your hopes for the rest of the season, and where do you think you're going to finish?
So my hope is we stay up. I went into the season thinking we would. I mean, I'll stick.
Yeah, I think you will.
I'll stick with the notion that we'll be. I think we'll be. We'll definitely be in that bunch. I think I wouldn't say we're in a false position, but I'm not really looking at the league table in terms of positioning at this point. I'm just thinking how many points have we got. So it's, that number is far more important to me than whether we're 8th or 15th or something like that.
Sure.
Yeah, so I think we will finish in that kind of 14th to 15th range. But at the same time, I don't really feel we've been outplayed yet. I mean, as I said, we've played some good teams. Liverpool were pretty fortunate to beat us. I thought, our goalkeeper literally dropped it into the net, which is a very rare mistake for him. And, we'd been really pressing in that game and we're pretty unlucky not to score. Same with Leicester, had some good chances in that one and sort of conceded to a wonder goal late on. So, yeah, I think we have what it takes to stay in games against very good teams. I mean, Man City might be a different kettle of fish when we get around to playing them, I suppose. But yeah, generally, I've not seen many teams that look better than us on a one-off game. So yeah, I think we'll be. I hope and think we'll be in that kind of lower mid-table, comfortably safe from relegation territory.
Excellent. Well, we do hope you do. It'd be fantastic if you managed to stay up. What about Burnley then? And I appreciate this is usually quite a difficult question to ask opposing fans because you don't follow us. But from an outsider looking in, where do you think Burnley will end this season? And generally is fine.
I think, honestly, that same kind of range, that sort of probably the tier slightly above. I mean, having said that, the Premier League, so I guess it's slightly different this year. There isn't a defined top 6, or I don't think there will be a defined top 6. And the difference between finishing 8th and 16th might be like 6 points or something like that. So
yeah, you're right.
But I would say my pre-season predictions, I think we had Burnley. We didn't do it like we picked every single place. We had like tiers of teams, and so we had the teams we thought would go down, the teams that we thought might be in trouble, and then we had Burnley in that sort of I guess mulch of teams above that where they're going to finish mid-table. They're not going to be in a relegation battle. If everything breaks right, they could have like a tilt at getting into Europe, but probably more likely to be comfortable mid-table, I would say.
Brilliant. And then finally then, what is your prediction for the game? Give us a match prediction.
I do think this will be a draw. I think it's two really similar teams. We haven't lost a game by more than one goal for, I think, 14 months now or something ridiculous. We're like the masters of not conceding that many goals. So, I think a 1-1 looks like a fairly safe bet, I reckon. And I'd be pretty happy with that against a, established Premier League team. We've had some good results recently that mean it's certainly not a must-win game for us by any stretch of the imagination. So, yeah, I'll go for 1-1.
Excellent. Well, why don't you finish off by telling our listeners where they can get in touch with you, Ben?
So you can check me out on Twitter, which is @BladesPod, and then you can find the podcast of the same name on iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, wherever you get your podcasts.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us, and best of luck for the rest of the season.
Thank you. Same to you.
So Dave, we've heard the head-to-head stats and we've heard from Sheffield United fan this week about how they feel about the game. But generally speaking, how are you feeling about Saturday? What do you think? What do you think the result's going to be?
I think it's going to be tough. I mean, they've had a really good start. I think they surprised quite a lot of people. Sheffield United were a lot of people's favourites to go straight down. I think a lot of the attention was on Norwich, who'd won the league, Villa, who'd obviously spent a lot of money. Sheffield United hadn't spent a lot of money. And as we know, that can cause issues with newly promoted teams to the Premier League. They've also come up from relatively quickly. They spent 6 seasons in League One, but they do seem to have something about them. They've had a really good start to the season, and they're defying a lot of people's expectations. So I think it's going to be a really, really tough game. I think if Burnley get anything out of the game, if they get a draw on Saturday, it'd be a really, really good result. I think it's going to be tough. I don't like to predict defeats for Burnley, so I'm going to go for a 2-2 draw on Saturday.
Yeah, it's quite a decent result. I think I don't really know what to expect to the weekend. I've massively enjoyed watching United since they came up. I think their play is fantastic. They are sticking to their guns and it's starting to pay off. They are hugely entertaining to watch, and they actually play the kind of entertaining football that I do wish we would play. That said, they don't seem to defend as robustly as we do. So they are in that balance at the moment where they know they've got to score goals because they can be quite susceptible to conceding goals. Now, that could very much mean that they even themselves out and actually, we defend very well and they can't break us down. But it ends up being a draw. I've got a sneaky suspicion we're going to win, actually. I'm going to go for a 1-0 win, I think, for the Clarets. But it's going to be an interesting game, and I'm genuinely looking forward to it.
Fantasy Premier League update.
So, Dave, moving on away from weekend's football, and we have the rather significant matter of the coveted No Nay Never Fantasy Premier League. We run this every single year. We've been running it this season, and of course regular listeners have been listening to our analysis of the key players, the key fantasy league managers, and essentially who is vying for victory. So why don't you tell us who the movers and shakers are this week?
Okay, last week's joint leaders remain in this week's top 3 after game week 10's matches. Rob Greenwood is now back in the lead on his own. He's got 589 points, and Michael Freeman is 4 points back in 3rd place. But between them is John Sutcliffe's Subculture FC with an impressive 106 points in game week 10. That was more than anyone else in the No Nay Never League, and that also earns him the overall 2nd place, just 2 points from the top.
Good stuff. And what about Team No Nay Never? Team No Nay Never. How are we all doing? I think I might have had an improvement, actually.
Well, yeah, you'll be pleased to know that you've climbed off the bottom this week, Natalie.
Yes!
Your team, Dingle Bells, is up 3 places to 160th. That's out of 163, so still in the relegation zone.
Whoa! 3 places! I actually sorted something out with my team and I made some changes and I did that captain thing that I'm supposed to do. And I only moved up 3 places.
I think you got more points than me, actually, but I think you were getting adrift, so it might take a few weeks to get back. You're on 395 points now. That's your cumulative total. My Burnley Stats team, they climbed again to 130th. They're on 465 points, and Richard Steele is again the highest place of the No Nay Never podcasters, but he dropped to 30th position. His team's got an overall points total of 529.
I'm still 70 points behind you. That is depressing. I'm not going to claw that back. I am not finishing this season on the bottom, I'm determined. So let's have a look at the actual players themselves and look at some tactics. What about the dream team? Did any Burnley players make it in this week?
Well, he didn't quite make it into the Game Week 10 Dream Team, Dwight McNeil, but he's Burnley's high scorer overall for the season to date. He's got 42 points, so a big well done to all those shrewd FPL managers who elected to include Dwight in their team at the start of the season. Mentioning no names. Yeah, I've got him in my team. Chelsea had two players in the latest Dream Team after the weekend's matches. Both Christian Pulisic and also Willian made the grade and got into the Dream Team.
Excellent. I've also seen as well that De Bruyne has been pushed off the overall leaderboard in terms of players, and Jamie Vardy's now taken the hot seat with 74 points. And actually, I think Sterling and De Bruyne have both dropped down places as well, but there's been some movers and shakers at the top, so now might be a good time to start making some changes to my team. That's obviously another Premier League update for you in terms of our Fantasy League. We'll have another look next week, and to all of you vying for top spot, good luck, but Dingle Bells are coming to get you.
Stackman Dave's quiz question.
And finally, we finish this week's quiz the way we nearly started it, with our false start, and that is the quiz question. Dave, what do our listeners need to answer this week?
Okay, this week's quiz question is, it's over 9 years since Burnley's previous visit to play Sheffield United at Bramall Lane, which was a 3-3 draw in the Championship in October 2010. But which player who has played for the Clarets and the Blades during his career scored a goal for Sheffield United in that match?
Oh, that's a tricky one.
I did make it tricky this week, although I did see somebody had tweeted it out in the week, so there has been a tweet that's mentioned it, not my tweet, but someone else's.
There you go, listeners. You can go and do some homework. You can go and stalk Twitter and you'll be able to find the answer to this. Please do feel free to get involved in the quiz question. Tweet us at No Nay Never, or you can post it on our Facebook Facebook page, or you can email us to podcast@nonaynever.net, and we will give you the answer at the start of our next preview show. Now, Dave, if our listeners are getting stat happy and want more information, where can they find your Burnley Stats page?
Yeah, there's a short link for that. It's that's bit.ly/Burnley Stats, and that's all in lowercase.
Excellent. Well, that is all we have time for this week. It's been another jam-packed episode of the preview show, my favourite show of the week. We hope you've loved it too. The team will be back on Tuesday with the main show to look at the game away at Bramall Lane and to analyse, hopefully, what will be a good victory. So Godspeed to all travelling Clarets who are making their way up, down to my geography's board, to Sheffield, across the border to the other county, shall we say, to Sheffield. Cheer on the boys, bring back those 3 points, and make sure you have great days out. Dave and I will be back next week for another episode of the preview show. If you've got anything you want us to cover in the meantime, you know how to get in touch with us, but we'll be back next week to talk about this. This has been the preview show brought to you by the No Nay Never podcast. Until next time.